Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I am happy to have you with us. Connor Riley going to stop by, speak to us a little bit later on. A lot to get to with him. Major Burns, of course, going into the transfer portal. We'll talk about what that means for Georgia here today. Also, the chance that Georgia is still active, bringing players in from the transfer portal. We'll obviously keep our eye on what might or might not be going on with all of that. I also want to continue a conversation I started yesterday on the idea of these huge numbers of first-round picks that it seems to be as kind of a prerequisite for winning the national championship. What we said we were going to do is look at the potential candidates on the Georgia roster to do just that and spend some time talking about how they actually get that done. Quarterback seems like a great place to start. We'll do that with JT Daniels. In fact, we'll begin the show that way today. And by the way, before the week is done, I also have a really big announcement, a fun announcement I'm looking forward to make about an event we're all going to get a chance to do together. That's right, back face-to-face and in person together again around Dog Nation. We'll tell you about that before the week is done, too. A little bit of a tease on that for now, though. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So all things being equal, the goal today is to simply be able to finish the broadcast, something we were not able to do yesterday. I actually got a lot of nice messages from a lot of you yesterday because apparently this was more harrowing on air than I realized. Connor Riley is producing today. He was not here yesterday. So as we're doing the R.S. Andrews cool down at the end of the show, it's more than it's kind of like when you're in high school and like the principal comes over the intercom. We had like an intercom go off and like they said everybody get to the had to take shelter. We had to go like sheltering in place into the hallways here, the bowels of our Dog Nation World Headquarters studios. Apparently it was a little bit of a cliffhanger ending to the show, at least on video yesterday. So for those of you that send messages, I certainly appreciate that. And for those of you that, and I even got a few of these messages there as well of like, hey, what happened to the podcast cool down yesterday? That's the moment in the show we take comments on the podcast. We actually got kicked out of the studio yesterday. We did not get a chance to provide one of those. But for those of you who normally watch on video, if you missed our interview with John Stinchcomb, John not able to join us because the weather wreaked havoc with our phone lines. We actually did record some with John that we put on the podcast. So check out DawgNation Daily on podcast, and you can get all of that from yesterday. Now, speaking of yesterday, we began the show by saying that, hey, it was a great run for Georgia in the NFL draft with 9 players selected. That's a record for the program. That's worth celebrating. And it's also instructive, if you want to look beyond that, of what's the next step for Georgia, that next frontier in terms of actually winning the national championship. And if you look at the last 3 national champions, the seasons that have taken place since Georgia last made the playoff in 2017, what you see is, especially if you kind of make room for multiple years worth of data on this, what you see is those national championship teams have somewhere around a half dozen first-round picks, some on offense, some on defense, some of these coming in the year after they win the national championship, some of these from that same team who were not draft eligible that year going later on. But you see like around a half dozen or so. I think Clemson in 2018 so far only has 5, but maybe more still to come off that 2018 roster. But I think LSU's up to 6 now. Alabama obviously had 6 here this year off its 2020 national championship team. You see like a half dozen first-round picks for recent national champions, and I just think it stands to reason. It's not hard and fast science, but it stands to reason that if Georgia is going to put itself in the best position for its own national championship here during the 2021 season, then as we said yesterday, you probably need to start looking for about a half dozen guys who are going to play like high-end first-round picks to get that done. And so one of the things that we said yesterday was, well, let's spend a few days in the days to come looking at the potential candidates for Georgia to do just that, and let's see if we can have something that kind of approximates a scientific conversation about, what is the benchmark required if you want to get there. Now, quarterback seems like a great place to start because, as I said with John Stinchcomb in our interview yesterday, in addition to quarterback play at a first-round level being a hallmark of recent national champions, Clemson, LSU, Alabama, it also seems to be a lever for other first-round picks. Wide receivers and running backs seem to go along with these first-round type quarterbacks. And so with Georgia, obviously the thought is you may be in very good position preparation for the 2021 season with JT Daniels at the helm. In fact, FoxSports.com, Jason McIntyre, the writer, with its way too early 2022 mock draft, it projects JT Daniels to go number 1 overall. If you're interested, it'd be the Detroit Lions that McIntyre has Daniels going to. So I guess Daniels following the footsteps of former Georgia quarterback Matthew Stafford, now in L.A., if you believe Jason McIntyre on this. But what's interesting is, for McIntyre, in his mock draft at FoxSports.com, he actually has 7 quarterbacks going in the 2022 draft, which is obviously, more than we had this year. And I believe that'd be a record for all time, I think, or at least certainly very close to it. Let me show you this if you're watching in video. These are the quarterbacks that McIntyre could see going in the 2022 draft, as I said before, led by JT Daniels. Believe it or not, the guy that Georgia just played in the Peach Bowl, Desmond Ridder, McIntyre has him going 2nd overall. Of course, he's out of Cincinnati. Then you get to Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma, Sam Howell from North Carolina, Jaden Daniels, the quarterback at Arizona State, Carson Strong, who's quarterback at Nevada, and then the guy that kind of overtook JT Daniels at USC, Keaton Slovis, also going in the first round there as well. So interesting to see Jason McIntyre projecting Daniels going number 1 overall, but also interesting to see how much potential competition there could be to be a first-round quarterback next year with guys like Riddler and everybody else that's kind of in the fold there, who are also contending for one of those first-round spots. It's kind of an interesting thing all the way around, Spencer Rattler and everything else included, for who you might see go in that first round next year. So that kind of got us thinking, well, if you wanted to play like a first-round pick that was also capable of leading Georgia to a national championship, what exactly would that need to look like from JT Daniels? Now, this is where I'm going to get a little bit nerdy for a second, and I'm going to work really hard to make this very easy to understand. And I also want to say this. What I'm about to explain to you, I'm not here to tell you that this is the only way to potentially crunch these numbers and potentially project these numbers. You may come up with a sort of a different evaluation in your own mind, and if you think that your evaluation is better than mine, then by all means, reach out and tell me at DawgNation Daily on Twitter or in any of our comment sections. I actually just want to have this conversation. I'm not about to give this to you as if it was given to me, on Mount Olympus or something like that. This is just sort of the best I could do to kind of come up with what a reasonable projection would be for JT Daniels here this past season. And I have done so by looking at quarterbacks who were taken in the first round over the course of the last 3 NFL drafts. That's kind of the span of time that we're kind of working with here. Now, here's what I've also done. Because when you look at these quarterbacks, one of the things that you see is, for instance, what do you have? 5 quarterbacks taken this year in the first round. There were 4 taken in 2020. There were 3 taken in 2019. So when you look at some of these quarterbacks, what you kind of realize is they're not all perfect comps to JT Daniels. For instance, Daniel Jones from the 2019 draft is sort of taken because of projecting, talent, kind of viewing him as more of a project and a prospect than a finished project. You might say the same thing about Jordan Love coming out of Utah, who is not really, competing for national championships, things like that. Trey Lance, kind of the same way. You might say that about him. I would say even Zach Wilson as well, because that's kind of a level below what we think of Georgia and the SEC as. So here is what I've tried to do. I've tried to look at the quarterbacks taken in the first round over the last 3 years who were also Heisman finalists. To me, when you kind of cross-reference first-round picks with Heisman finalists, at that point in time, you kind of get to a group that to me sort of feels like JT Daniels. Now, also within this group as well, here's what's kind of confusing, is we've actually had a weird 3 years in the fact that not everybody played the same number of games in 2020. You had some guys who were hurt over the course of the 2018-2019 season. So I've tried to kind of sort of pick a full season for each of these guys that gives you kind of a projection for what they might be in terms of what you could expect from JT Daniels. So for Trevor Lawrence, I took his national championship season of 2018, even though he obviously played in 2019 and 2020. For Justin Fields, who was a first-round pick this year and a Heisman finalist, as well during his career, I took his season in 2019. That was his full year that he played there for Ohio State. For Joe Burrow, obviously, I took the 2019 season for him. For Tua Tagovailoa, I took the 2018 season for him. And then for Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins, the 2 quarterbacks drafted in the 2019 draft, I took their 2018 seasons as a way of making this projection. Does that make sense? Trying to pick a full season for these guys that was representative of their skill set as a way of making a comparison for JT Daniels. Now, For JT Daniels, here is what I did. Obviously, he played in 4 games for Georgia last year, which is not a full season. But when you look at what a full season might be, let's go ahead and give him 15 games, thinking that Georgia plays for a national championship. And let's assume here, and this is where I'm taking some liberties with the assumption, when you play a longer season, some of those games come against better competition, a Clemson, for instance, or who you might play in an SEC championship and college football playoff. But this is also adding games against, like, say, UAB and Charleston Southern. So I'm making kind of a broad assumption that when you add to 15 games, it kind of averages out to be on equal to what Daniels played in his 4 games last year, the 3 games against SEC competition, and the bowl game against a highly rated Cincinnati. Does that make sense? So if you look at his stat line in his 4 games, kind of project that over the course of 15 games, assuming it kind of all averages out. And if you average together the seasons of Trevor Lawrence in 2018, Justin Fields in 2019, Joe Burrow in 2019, Tua Tagovailoa in 2018, Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins in 2018, this is the comparison that you get. Hopefully you're still following in all of this. On video, let me show it to you, and I will read it to you for everybody else. So if we project out it for a full season for JT Daniels, you get 4,616 yards, a 67.2% completion percentage, 10.3 yards per attempt, 38 touchdowns, 7.5 interceptions. Now, in comparison to some very good seasons from some very good quarterbacks, the numbers for Daniels, if you can project it out over the course of 15 games, it actually compares fairly favorably in some of these areas. For instance, Daniels has more passing yards than the comparable quarterbacks. They only had 4,230 yards. Daniels' completion percentage is slightly smaller. The comparison quarterbacks had 69.5% completion percentage. I'm not sure that's much of a difference. They essentially had the same yards per attempt. That's a stat that really matters to me. But this is sort of the point of the whole exercise. If you really want to look at the big difference between the very best quarterbacks of the last 3 years, those guys who were first-round picks and Heisman Trophy winners in comparison to JT Daniels, it's in the number of touchdown passes thrown. The comparison quarterbacks average 44 touchdown passes per year in their season that we're using here, whereas JT Daniels averaged just 38. So all of that to say this. If you really do believe that JT Daniels can be a first-round pick in this upcoming NFL draft in 2022, and why would you not? He's obviously got the potential and the talent to do that. But if you're really looking to see the missing piece in all of that, it's not really completion percentage. It's not really yards per attempt. Those numbers all look really good. Even the total number of passing yards, if you project out Daniels over the course of a full season, that looks pretty good there as well. Interceptions, Daniels is on pace to throw slightly more than some of the best quarterbacks. But once again, we're talking about a difference of a couple of picks. I'm not quite so sure over the course of a long season that matters all that much. But the big difference for Daniels, the big difference for Georgia, the big threshold for him to step over that he hasn't crossed over yet if he wants to look like a Trevor Lawrence or a Tua Tagovailoa or a Joe Burrow or a Kyler Murray or these quarterbacks that led their team to the college football playoff, he simply got to throw more touchdowns. And if you close your eyes and think about this in the real world, you can kind of imagine this, right? I mean, think about the big numbers that he put up in the Mississippi State game, as a for instance. Georgia that day still only scored 35 points. So that is the final threshold for Daniels. It's going to show up hopefully in the Clemson game to start the season, and then against lesser competition in games after that. Not just compiling the yards, not just completing passes, but finding a way to strike in the end zone. If Daniels really can add more touchdowns to his projected total compared to what he did a year ago, then that could be the big step he could take towards actually looking like some of these quarterbacks who've been Heisman finalists and been first-round picks and led their team to the college football playoff and perhaps even beyond that here over the course of the last 3 seasons. So kind of a simple look at that there. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. My name is Brandon Adams, and I am glad to have you with us here today, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you with us here today. Of course, a big thanks to our friends at ESOG for making it all possible. You know, they are official partners of the University of Georgia. That always makes them fun to do business with. They've been longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily there as well. So it's always good to support those who are supporting DawgNation and supporting UGA and everything like that. And that's what you're going to feel good about when you support Engineered Solutions of Georgia. But let me tell you what's even better than that. ESOG shows up in a big way to help you with your foundation and your waterproofing issues. This stuff matters. It is so important when you're a homeowner to make sure that you're protecting the structural integrity of your home. So when you see that water creeping in when it rains, you know that could be the sign of a more substantial problem. When you see those cracks there in your foundation, it's the kind of thing that causes you to kind of stop in your tracks there for a moment. But don't just stop and do nothing. Stop and take the next step by reaching out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They're a solutions-based company. That means they're going to provide an answer to you for your problem and all this kind of stuff. And if it's simple and easy, they'll tell you that. And if it's more substantial, obviously, they'll tell you that there as well. They're also really easy to get in touch with. You can simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And, of course, it's great to have them as a part of our program here today. We're going to get Connor Riley here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And obviously, we're in the time of year. We sort of knew this was coming, and it is now coming now, where with the, kind of loosening of the transfer restrictions and the installation of the free pass and the one-time transfer, and we just sort of knew that much the same way the transfer conversation has been hot and heavy now for the last couple of years in college football, it was going to get even more intense in the time to come. And on a roster like Georgia that's very deep and where a lot of people aren't getting a chance to play maybe as much as they would like to in a perfect situation, that Georgia might be more susceptible to this than some other programs are. Latest example of that is Major Burns, who has put his name into the transfer portal, of course, a 2020 signee for the Georgia Bulldogs. Put it out on Twitter yesterday that he's looking to move on from UGA. Had some nice things to say about the Dogs, but apparently he believes his next kind of take a play on his name major move is to move on to another program. And I guess here's what I'll say about this. I think that this is a little bit of a loss for Georgia. I think it's certainly a disappointing thing for UGA fans coming on the heels of spring practice and some of the stuff that Smart said about Burns a year ago when he got a chance to play. Did not play perfectly. Played a lot, for instance, in the Florida game, a game in which the Georgia defense kind of got torched in. But after the game, Smart talked about some growing pains and some things that Burns was learning there. And you certainly got the impression that Smart was happy with the development that Major Burns is making. On the heels of spring practice here, I think you would have said that while Major Burns is not really a candidate to start for Georgia right now, he might be Georgia's first safety off the bench as a for instance, and a guy that is a contender for playing time and a chance to start for Georgia maybe a year from now in 2022. So losing Burns to the transfer portal, even if it's kind of a unavoidable consequence of the current age we live in college football, it is a little bit of a disappointment for Georgia because Burns, I think, was a part of UGA's defensive back, particularly there at safety depth. Now, Georgia doesn't rotate and play quite as many safeties as it does cornerbacks, nickelbacks, things along those lines. But still, you want to have that depth. Burns, I think, is a guy who's capable of playing at Georgia and in the years to come would have played a lot more. But alas, he's on his way to the transfer portal. So as a Georgia fan, I'm a little bit disappointed about this. Doesn't mean it's a death knell to Georgia or anything like that. You've got, guys like Latavius Brini, who this probably opens up more of an opportunity for. Obviously, you still have Tyke Smith coming in at the nickel position. He's also got a chance to play some safety for you there as well. So it's not like Georgia was out of options here. But Burns, I believe, was above the line of someone good enough to play at Georgia. And in future years, including 2021 some, you're going to see him play a little bit more. Also, by way of opinion, I'll tell you this. This is the kind of transfer that I personally would have no problem if the rules were just a little bit more stringent and a little bit more strict to prevent these kinds of transfers. And I know that's, is it anathema? Is that the big word I'm looking for here? I know that's like, completely opposite of the way that a lot of people feel. And I respect and understand those who say, hey, whatever the players want to do, we ought to open up the rule book to allow the players to do exactly what they want to do. I understand where that feeling comes from. As we said before, we may disagree on what's best for players, but hopefully me, you, and everybody in between all would acknowledge that whatever is best for players is what's best. And I can certainly understand why somebody would say that it's just best to let players do what they want. If they get restless and ready to move on because they're not playing enough, then by all means let them move on. But think about this for a moment. If you really are like the number 3 safety at Georgia, not on the field, but waiting the wings, the next guy to be on the field, and that's potentially what Major Burns was. I mean, how many better opportunities are you going to get than that around college football, given the fact that Georgia's entire secondary just got drafted into the NFL? Obviously, at least the overwhelming majority of those guys just got taken in the NFL draft this past weekend. So sometimes I would suggest, and I say this as someone who's got a little bit of gray in my hair now, not quite as young as some of the guys we talk about here on the show anymore, that actually staying where you are and waiting the wings and being patient might actually be a better overall situation than whatever it is that you think that you're moving on to by throwing your name to the transfer portal. Now, it's hard to tell a guy like that when it's his own life and it's his own career and its own stuff that he's thinking about. But pulling back from the kind of 10,000-foot view, I think sometimes you see that a little bit more clearly. So admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the transfer portal, even though somewhat hypocritical. I'm always talking about some of these names that Georgia might have a chance to bring in there on that. These are strange times that we're living in college football. Obviously, we wish Burns the best as he looks forward to finding, I guess, a better opportunity for him somewhere else, and we'll continue to wish him well as he does that. But this, to me, an example of the kind of transfer that I sort of wish the current transfer rules might work to prevent. That is Around the Doghouse here today. We'll get Connor Riley on this and a lot more in just a moment. Before we do that, let me also remind you about my friends at secondchance.law. I think the work they do is just so valuable when it comes to a really important issue. You've got some people obviously have things on their record that they wish they could kind of move away from because it prevents them from getting the job they might like to get, or in some cases the living opportunity they want to take advantage of and enjoy. Well, that's what secondchance.law can help with, because there's some new laws in Georgia that allow certain old convictions to be restricted off your criminal history, which is a really cool thing. But like a lot of things with the law, deciding if you're eligible for this can actually be kind of confusing. So this is what secondchance.law does. They've put together a free online quiz that you can take. And by answering these questions, you can determine, are you eligible for this program or not? And the good news is, even if you're not, secondchance.law can give you a couple tips, couple pointers for you to figure out how you could become eligible for something like this. So it's a great thing. Also, I love my friends at secondchance.law because one of the partners is a double dog. That means 2-time graduate of the University of Georgia, longtime listener to DawgNation Daily, a former Redcoat. We love the Redcoat band around here. And one of the partners here is a former Redcoat band member. So that's a really cool thing. So the website to go to is secondchance.law. That's secondchance.law. You can find out your eligibility there today. All right. A lot to do in the program. Sometimes the portal giveth, sometimes the portal taketh away. Maybe an example of Georgia looking into the portal for an interesting name. We'll talk about that before we're done on today's program. But for now, a lot on what's going on with Burns, NFL draft recap, and a little bit of a look at what we just talked about with JT Daniels. Let's say hello to Connor Riley right now as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to Connor Riley here, Kroger Fresh Take. A lot to look at with UGA, as Connor wrote at DawgNation.com, I believe, this morning. There isn't going to be an offseason. It's going to be the Georgia's got roster spots to fill. Another scholarship just comes available because of Burns' departure here. So there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of discussion. Of course, recruiting never really slows down around here either. So busy off season. Connor, good to have you with us to talk about that. Let me bring you in on the Major Burns thing. I think this is a little bit of a loss for Georgia because I think that Burns is a guy that's good enough to play and was going to play more, probably some this year, certainly maybe a lot more in 2022. And I don't mind telling you that, I guess I sort of wish that these kinds of transfers weren't happening around the rest of college football, because I'm not quite so sure that a player like this, waiting the wings for a chance to play like Georgia, I'm honestly not so sure he's going to find a better chance than that somewhere else. But maybe I'm just kind of out of touch with modern times on this. So I'll bring you in for your thoughts on what's next for Major, what's next for UGA in light of all of this.
I don't know. If you're good enough for LSU to want you as a prospect in the 2020 class, if you're good enough to sign at Georgia, I think you can play a lot of places, and the reality was Major Burns probably wasn't going to play a whole lot this year. Now, losing him, I think, does impact the depth Georgia has at this position, and I also don't expect Major Burns to be the last safety or defensive back that enters the transfer portal from Georgia this year. But, yes, it's a loss, especially from a depth perspective, but as far as, him entering the transfer portal, that's just the reality we live in now. And, you've read the story on DawgNation.com. Jeff Sentell over a year ago wrote a very great profile on Major Burns. He lost his dad in 2018. May want to move back home closer to his family, may want to go play for LSU there, and so I'm certainly understanding and sympathetic of this transfer portal rules and changes, and ultimately these guys want to play and get in the field, and it's fair to say your point that hey, he might not have a better opportunity than at Georgia, but I would also point out Georgia's already got 5-star athlete Malachi Starks committed to play next year. They seem to be in the lead for the number one safety in the country in Kamari Wilson. Who's to say a year from now we're not hyping up Wilson and Starks and potentially saying, oh, these guys are going to pass up Major Burns on the Georgia depth chart?
Yeah, certainly a possibility of that. I guess the one thing that we can agree on in the near term, even though Burns not projected to be a starter this year, this is, a little bit of a blow to the Georgia depth there a little bit. I probably kind of think of Burns as maybe the number 3 safety on this team, possibly. A little bit of a blow to the depth there.
I mean, 3 in the sense that I think Latavius Brini would be ahead of him, and I would think Tyke Smith would be as well, but those guys are probably playing at star for you. But I would still think, depending on the situation, those guys would have seen the field before Major Burns.
You think that Brini was ahead of Burns on the safety depth chart before now?
I think so.
I wonder about that. That's kind of interesting. I talked about JT Daniels a moment ago about my projection for him on the basis of what a 15-game season would look like. We'll think optimistically here. And in comparison to what, over the course of the last 3 years, quarterbacks who have been taken in the first round and who are also Heisman finalists. That's, after all, the kind of quarterback it seems like you need to really be in the playoff discussion as of yet. And to summarize what I spent a few minutes talking about before, the passing yards look good for Daniels. The completion percentage looks good for Daniels. The yards per attempt looks good for Daniels. If you're looking for the one area where there's more work to be done, more meat kind of left on the bone, if you will, seems like he probably needs to throw a few more touchdown passes over the course of a 15-game schedule. If you want to kind of put him in that same discussion of a Fields or a Kyler Murray or a Trevor Lawrence or a Tua Tagovailoa, or certainly a Joe Burrow had like 60. That may be the outlier in the entire comparison here. But it sort of seems like if you're looking for that one area where over the course of a full season there's room for Daniels to do a little bit more, to me it kind of comes in the touchdowns thrown category.
I'm just curious. Off the top of your head, do you know how many touchdowns Justin Fields threw for in 2019?
I know because I was researching today. I believe it was 41.
Would you have known that if you didn't look it up?
I knew it was a lot. I wouldn't have known. I'm not the kind of guy that walks around with those stats in my head necessarily. I knew it was a lot. I knew it was 40-plus, but I wouldn't have known how many it was.
When it comes to JT Daniels and what we want to see out of him and what you potentially want to see him become a first-round draft pick, it's not about numbers or how many games Georgia wins. I'd like to quote a 1973 Supreme Court case, Jacob Ellis versus Ohio. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. And so you need JT Daniels to be a first-round quarterback and see it from him, more so than he throws X amount of touchdown passes or his yards per attempt number is X. He needs to look and play like a first-round quarterback.
I think what's really interesting in all of this is, now here's the one thing that I was also kind of aware of, but when you actually see the numbers in black and white print, it sticks out a little bit more. Trevor Lawrence's numbers at Clemson are not eye-popping.
No.
I mean, it's kind of funny that he's kind of considered to be the greatest quarterback prospect of all time, and I say that in air quotes. And I'm not mocking that. I think Lawrence is a terrific quarterback as well, and I kind of always have. But he's never had a Joe Burrow season or a Mac Jones season. He's never had one of those. In fact, if you look at the 2018 numbers, he only threw 30 touchdown passes in 2018. Now, that's the number I would not have guessed. I guess he also was slow to take over the starting quarterback at the beginning of the year.
First 4 games that season,
but he did play in all of those games. But you do take some time off the beginning there. But he never really had in any of his years that like one of these just gigantic Burrow level seasons. That's the somewhat surprising thing to me is that in comparison to the last 2 national championship quarterbacks, the numbers for Lawrence are actually fairly paltry by comparison.
Right, and Lawrence ended up going number 1 because he looked like what a number 1 quarterback prospect should look like. And while, yes, he didn't have the touchdown numbers that a Burrow or Justin Fields did, when the game was on the line and it mattered, I mean, obviously, maybe not in the national championship game this past year, or the Ohio State-Clemson game, or the national championship game against LSU, but that 2019 game against Ohio State, that 2018 game against Alabama, when his team absolutely needed him to be the best player on the field, he was on a field loaded with pros. For JT Daniels to get to that 15th game, to be that first-round draft pick, more often than not this season, Georgia's going to need him to be the best player on the field, especially with George Pickens now out for the foreseeable future and possibly the entire 2021 season.
Yeah, because one of the things we're going to talk about in the days to come is that if you look at these recent national champions and the huge number of first-round picks they've had, it really seems like quarterback, and I used the same phrase with John Stinchcomb yesterday, I used it again with you right now, is kind of a lever. In that if your quarterback plays the way that the best quarterback's going to play, that's good for your wide receivers. It's good for your running backs, which, by the way, all three of the most recent national champions have had first-round running backs leading their offense in a way that's kind of running counter course to the rest of the football world, where we have less popular first-round running backs than ever before. Last three national champions have had first-round running backs at the center of all of this, but it's all kind of led by that first-round quarterback. That if the quarterback plays the way that he's supposed to, all of a sudden the rest of the offense seems to get a lift from that there too.
Right. I think you can even look back to the 2020 NFL draft. If Jake Fromm plays better and the Georgia offense is better as a byproduct of that in the 2019 season, DeAndre Swift is probably a first-round pick. But because the rest of the offense was so gummed up by the passing struggles that season, I don't think DeAndre Swift got to show just how talented and good he really was. And you could pull that out to the wide receiver numbers as well. You know, if JT Daniels is really good, and I mean really, really good this season, Jermaine Burton's probably going to have 1,000 yards receiving. Garris Jackson might approach those numbers. Darnell Washington is going to dwarf what draft picks Trey McKitty and Charlie Warner did these past 2 seasons. So if those guys are producing those type of numbers, it all sort of leads back to JT Daniels.
So let me be super nerdy for a second, then we'll move off of Daniels. By the way, I'm about to announce our Kroger 5-Star Mom for today there as well, so stay with that as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take here. But if we brought in like one of these like math guy, nerdy football, minds, and we said, hey, if we want the most accurate projection for JT Daniels this upcoming season, one of the things that super nerdy guy would say is, well, you also have to consider what the typical value of the Georgia quarterback position has been. In other words, you got to look at the last 5 years of Georgia quarterbacks, because that's going to kind of factor into what Daniels does this year, because he is the current Georgia quarterback.
Right.
And obviously that's going to be a little bit of a weight on Daniels' projection, because the Georgia quarterback numbers, the last 5 years or so have not been particularly good. Now, there is reason for some Georgia fans, though, to say, well, this ain't your daddy's Georgia quarterback anymore, because it's Todd Monken in year 2. It's JT Daniels who's getting all this sort of preseason love and all the things kind of related to that. But easy to forget that Jamie Newman was getting the same level of love a year ago. I mean, sometimes we have a tendency to kind of do this no matter who the Georgia quarterback is. The point here is, how much do you think the previous history of Georgia quarterbacks should be factored into what we think is possible for Daniels here for this upcoming season?
None.
I hope you're right.
I think Todd Monken is, and you're the leader of the James Coley, anti-James Coley bandwagon at this point, but just what Todd Monken does with his offense is so fundamentally different than what Coley and even Jim Chaney had done. I think the most touchdown passes that a Georgia quarterback has had since Kirby Smart took over was 30 by Jake Fromm in 2018. If JT Daniels only has 30 passing touchdowns this season, that's not, and I know I just sort of poo-pooed the whole numbers thing, but Georgia does need that to be greater than that, I think. Unless, Zamir White has a truly monster and massive season, or Kendall Milton, or pick whichever running back you want. But I think this Georgia offense is going to stylistically look very different, maybe even from what we saw a season ago, just in the sense that they'll be able to do more and operate with greater confidence now that they have JT Daniels and they have these off-season practice workouts to get things done. So, yes, you are certainly correct, and I think bringing up the past Georgia quarterbacks, but just given how much experience this group has, both at the quarterback and I would say the wide receiver position, because to keep referencing nerdy guys here on May 4th, a nerd's paradise.
Sure.
wide receiver returning numbers often play a very significant role in how a quarterback and an offense as a whole develop over the course of a year.
So one more semi-nerdy thing, and we'll move off this. I just quickly perused Jake Fromm's career game logs at Georgia. Now, the reason why I picked Fromm is because he was a 3-year starter, and he was an NFL-level player. He was drafted into the NFL. So there's a fairly interesting comparison here, and I did this fairly quick, but I believe I'm right about this. Fromm only threw 4 touchdown passes in a game twice. Did it against Georgia Tech in 2018, and then again in 2019. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how infrequently Georgia's had these like multiple touchdown pass games from its quarterback. So to me, if you want a really interesting idea for how good JT Daniels is going to be for Georgia in 2021, I don't think you have to look too much further past the Clemson game in terms of if Daniels throws touchdowns, multiple touchdowns, let's say he throws 3 touchdowns in that game against a Clemson defense that we think of as really, really good, then the idea that Daniels is about to then go on the kind of run that equals the kind of 40-plus touchdown passes that the best quarterbacks have had over the course of the last 3 years, if you do that against Clemson, you really have reason to believe that this really is about to happen. Now, is it possible that you don't play well against Clemson and you do play well against everybody else? That's obviously possible. I guess I'm more talking about the potential projection of if Daniels is throwing 3 touchdown passes against Clemson, then Georgia fans better get ready to buckle up for the kind of air raid, scoring through the air offense that really Georgia just has not had a number of years.
I would say maybe ever. In this program history, Mike Bobo certainly had some great offenses, but I would say those were still predicated on the run game there. And to the Clemson point, that game, we've said it time and time again, is going to be a tone setter for the rest of that season, just in the sense that if JT Daniels comes out and looks great right there and plays well in that game, I know the mock draft you referenced had him at number 1. More often than not, I've seen him in the middle tier,
Sure.
4th or 5th quarterback
Sure.
off the board. If he plays well and lights it up in that game, he's going to be a consensus top 5 pick in my opinion. And whether he ultimately is that, it'll depend on how his knee checks out at the combine next year. But if he plays well in that game, that is just going to be another tone setter for that Clemson game, which absolutely will set the tone and tenor for this Georgia season.
I want to talk more about the NFL draft and the Georgia performance therein in just a moment, but here's part of our Kroger Fresh Take. We've also been honoring our Kroger 5-star moms here this week. It's been such a fun promotion to do. We've gotten so many great submissions for that, and we've got a great collection of gifts courtesy of our friends at Kroger for the winner here. Multitude of gift cards, including a great gift card there to Kroger there as well. Today, I want to congratulate Rosemary Bayer, who is the winner of our Kroger 5-star mom. She was nominated by her daughter-in-law, Judith Bayer. How about Rosemary? 94 years young, still lives by herself, awesome mother to 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and more than, get this now, 10 great-grandchildren. Kind, friendly, generous with compliments, a wonderful mother-in-law. What a cool thing here. Rosemary Bayer, 94 years old, our Kroger 5-star mom for today. We've got more of these to give out here over the course of the rest of the week. But 94 years, that's amazing. What a really cool thing. We love that great legacy. We love the role that family plays in the lives of so many of our folks around here at Dog Nation. We're honored to be giving out these Kroger 5-star moms here this week. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, you can treat your mom like a 5-star, whether you're a winner this week or not when it comes to Kroger. Kroger.com/Mother's Day, place to go to find out more about this. Whether you want brunch recipes, gift ideas, greeting cards, gift cards. How about the outdoor patio furniture? All the great savings you have on all that kind of stuff at Kroger right now. You can find out all about that when you go to Kroger.com/Mother's Day and get involved in all of that here today. Congratulations to our Kroger 5-star mom for today. Stay tuned tomorrow as we get ready to announce another one of those. This has just been so much fun to be able to do. What else was fun here this past weekend was looking at all the Georgia guys who were drafted into the NFL draft. 9 taken overall. It's a program record for Georgia and quite a continued run of Georgia. As I said on yesterday's show, it seems like ancient history when Georgia had 1 player taken in the 2017 draft after Smart's first season as Georgia coach. They have been a fixture on draft day and every year since then. Kind of what was your overall take of, the 9 taken throughout the draft, just the 1 name called in round 1, and kind of everything in between on all of that? Where do you think Georgia stands after 2021 draft weekend?
This is fully now Kirby Smart's program, and I think the NFL draft showed that. 9 players taken, a program record. 23 over the last 3 years. That is also a program record. 6 taken in the first 3 rounds. Kirby Smart has pretty clearly put his fingerprints all over this program now, and you're going to continue to see this 7, 8, 9, some years even double digits like I think they have the potential to get to in 2022. Now, having said all that, you look at some of the other teams that had those high draft totals. Are you going to be an Alabama, an Ohio State, or are you going to be more like a Notre Dame, a Michigan, and a Florida where you are producing NFL quality players, but you are not necessarily getting those same results that Alabama and Ohio State? And I would put Clemson in there as well.
Yeah, we said this on yesterday's show, that total number of draft picks, because it does include the Floridas and the Michigans, teams like that, Notre Dame, that's not a very good predictor for national championship success, because Michigan's actually been near the top of the total draft pick number the last 2 years. Really have very little to show for it on the field. With this in mind, I thought that Zach Barnett had a really good piece at Football Scoop where he was trying to kind of determine draft value for colleges for the players that were taken, and he used a very simple formula. This to me is really smart. That if you look at the first 250 picks and you assign 250 points to the number 1 overall pick and then 1 point to every player taken 250 and later, you could add the value of all that together and determine just how good your draft day was as a college. As a for instance, Notre Dame has 9 draft picks, Clemson had just 5. But if you use the formula that Barnett describes, Clemson actually had a better draft than Notre Dame because of where the Clemson players were taken, and we all understand that. By this same metric, Georgia finishes 3rd of all the colleges in the country behind, as you said before, just Alabama and Ohio State. So that to me is fairly representative where Georgia is. It is better, and by the way, there's so many categories where this is true. It is better than almost everybody else by a long shot, but there's just 1 or 2 teams you're still chasing, and it always seems like one of those couple is always Alabama. This year's draft, like almost every metric we can do, better than almost everybody, still chasing those 1 or 2.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately the atmosphere or neighborhood or whatever analogy you want to use that Georgia has chosen to live in. They want to pursue and go after championships. So for 98, 99% of schools, 9 draft picks is absolutely something to celebrate. For all the criticism that Dan Mullen has gotten, he should absolutely be thrilled that he put 2 first-round picks in the NFL draft and had 8 draft picks. That's something he should absolutely be able to sell to recruits. For Georgia, it's sort of just a shrug of the shoulders of, you're supposed to be doing this. When you recruit at that level and you spend the money to win at that level, you should be having 9 draft picks every season. And if you're going to continue to come up short against Alabama, where 8 of their 10 picks were taken in the first, I believe, 38 selections, that's the team you're going to have to overcome. And it starts by doing it on the field, and then I think eventually that can trickle down into other areas like the draft and like the recruiting front.
So I want to do this fairly quick, but I am curious of your opinion. So we're kind of looking over the course of the next few days at, if the number is 6, if you got to have, let's just shoot for the moon, so you got to have 6 first-round picks. We're trying to talk about those most reasonable candidates to truly be first-round picks for Georgia. We did JT Daniels off the top of the show today. Even with the eye-popping stats required, it's not unreasonable to say that JT Daniels could be one of those first-round picks. He is a very easy to project, not a guarantee, and I think Jason McIntyre saying he'll go number 1 overall at Fox Sports is probably a little bit of a stretch. But in terms of being in the first round, fairly easy to say, do this, and that's going to happen. Who are the next few names for you that kind of come up as fairly easy projections for first-round picks, and can you get to 6 off this 2021 team?
I think you have to include George Pickens on there. Obviously, it's all going to come down to how his knee heals and where it is, especially when he tests and goes and gets it checked out at the NFL Combine next year. I would say Jamari Sawyer is someone to put in there. You saw Lander Dickerson go 37th overall this year. If he was healthy and didn't have the injury concerns, he would have been a first-round pick as well for Alabama. I think Jamari Sawyer could follow in those similar footsteps, a versatile offensive lineman, big, mean, nasty, all the things you sort of look for, great leadership. I think he could sneak in around 1 next year. You need Trayvon Walker to get there. You need him to show that, hey, he could be a game-wrecking defensive lineman, because while this draft didn't have a lot of them, traditionally those guys tend to shoot up draft boards. I think one of Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith, they're both a little bit of a tricky evaluation.
Because it seems like there's a zero-sum game going with those two, that if one guy has a huge season, I hate to be this way, but it just seems to be kind of true, that if one guy has a huge season, he's sort of taking some food off somebody else's table. At least it seems that way.
Adam Anderson, Trayvon Walker, and Nolan Smith all can't have big seasons. They can all be very productive players and be key pieces in a Georgia defense, but they all can't hit 10 sacks. So someone is going to absorb those from the other. Anderson is a tricky evaluation because, look, if you're telling yourself that Adam Anderson can put on weight at this point in his career, I have some bad news for you. That's just not going to happen. We've been saying that for almost 4 full years now. So that weight thing is always going to be an issue, and how Georgia moves him around and plays him away from the edge is really going to determine if he can get in the first round. When it comes to Nolan Smith, yes, there were injury concerns when it came to Azeez Ojulari, but if you look at the pass rushers and edge rushers that were taken in the first round, I believe Kwity Paye was the only one who was under 6'5". Nolan Smith is not that big, and so he's going to have to really work to overcome and have a special season if he is going to sneak into the first round.
That's actually an interesting number, and I hadn't quite thought about that in regards to Nolan. I will say, though, that when it comes to like buying stock in a Panini Prism rookie card or an NFT or something like that, I mean, I'd still have my eye on Nolan here a little bit. I feel like it is just amazing to me how former number 1 recruit, who I don't think any Georgia coach would say has played badly during his time in Georgia. I mean, that's the thing you got to remember here. Fans get restless because they don't see the stats, but you don't hear anyone connected to the Georgia program saying, what's wrong with Nolan Smith? I have not sold any of my Nolan Smith stock, figuratively speaking here. And when you're thinking about those first-round picks, Nolan is still fairly prominent in my mind in regards to
I don't know when people decided they were going to turn on Nolan Smith and start being critical of saying, he hasn't done this, that, and the other. He was playing literally the exact same position behind a guy that led the SEC in sacks, was a top 50 draft pick, and very well could have been a first-round draft pick if he had gotten better medical grades. So, yes, Nolan hasn't produced yet, but neither has Trayvon Walker, and people haven't turned on him because he was playing behind Malik Herring for 2 years. Nakobe Dean, yes, he's been very good, as we've talked about on the show before, but he hasn't been Roquan good. So, again, with some of these guys' patience, and you've seen plenty of guys, Christian Barrymore comes to mind, that had big junior seasons, really took off, and that ended up propelling them into the first round of the draft.
All right, last thing. I almost shouldn't even ask this, but I'm going to anyway. I feel like my track record of like not being one of these guys that comes on the show and saying, so-and-so announcer hates my team. I feel like I've got a fairly good track record of not doing that kind of stuff. So what I'm about to say kind of comes from an honest place, because I don't do this a ton.
I'm almost positive I know where you're going here.
Did you feel like the draft was negative to Georgia? I thought that I thought Lewis Riddick was sort of weirdly cold after Eric Stokes got taken in the first round. I wasn't watching when Tyson Campbell got picked. I was coaching my son's baseball team. But some people were kind of telling me that they were kind of hammering the Campbell thing a little bit. I saw somebody else related to when Richard LeCounte got picked. It just sort of seemed like when I did see this when who's my tight end?
Trey McKitty.
When Trey McKitty got picked, they were kind of critical of Georgia not throwing to him more. I am not the guy that says the announcers are out to get my team. I don't think I've ever done this on the show. But it seemed like and I was watching ESPN, not watching NFL Network, it seemed like the ESPN draft coverage was a little negative around Georgia.
They were, I can tell you from watching, unfortunately, wall-to-wall coverage of it this weekend, Mel Kiper was very critical of maybe not so much the players, but where Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell went, and more specifically who they went ahead of. And because, Eric was round 1, Tyson was the first pick in round 2, they were maybe a little bit more, hey, maybe you take a guy like Asante Samuel who might not have the physical gifts but played better collegiately. Specifically with the 2 corners, Mel Kiper was very critical of the coaching job that Kirby Smarter had been done of those guys in terms of the consistency, in terms of the ball skills. I will have to say, though, they are right about Trey McKitty. For him to be a top 100 pick, a third-round pick, for him to have 6 catches last year, that is a little eyebrow-raising. And yes, there were obvious offensive concerns, but again, Georgia's had 2 tight ends taken in the last 2 NFL drafts, Charlie Warner in 2020. Neither of them had more than 10 catches in their final season. So
yeah, honestly, it's not necessarily wrong and all but it just was kind of weird. And you're right. In the case of Kiper, I guess this is more of an issue of Campbell and Stokes not matching what he had on his board, so therefore that's all he cares about. But in the McKitty thing, I'm not saying all the criticism is necessarily wrong. Maybe you should have thrown to him just a little bit more.
Yeah, you don't need to. And again, if Trey doesn't have that knee injury in camp last season and he's healthy for the start of the season, you wonder where he ultimately ends up finishing over the course of the year.
All right, Connor, terrific stuff. Look forward to reading a bunch from you both in terms of what's still left over from the draft, but obviously a lot of busy offseason, projecting 2022 draft, upcoming year. There's just so much to be done here around Dog Nation. Glad to have you on that wall.
Yep, offseason never ends. Thanks for having me on, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff from Connor Riley there. Appreciate his insight into all that. And he is right. They probably should have thrown to Trey McKitty more in retrospect, given the fact that he was drafted as high as he was. But in the case of, the Campbell thing, And this goes back to the Zach Barnett piece of Football Scoop I was talking about before, that you can say that, well, it's a disaster the 5-star recruit wasn't a first-round pick. But when you're taking, I think he's 33 overall. He's 33rd overall. I mean, at a certain point in time, you're not talking about much of a difference in being actually one of those first 32 picks. You're talking about being the first pick in the second round there. So, I mean, let's keep a little bit of perspective here. So just kind of interesting stuff all the way around. All right, let's bounce over. Let's do our SEC through here for a moment. Boy, a lot going on around the SEC. A lot of it is transfer related. I do want to start with some recruiting news. You probably saw yesterday that Georgia had a decommitment from 3-star linebacker Donovan Westmoreland out of Griffin, Georgia. A lot to like about Westmoreland as a player. He quickly not just decommits, but I'll use air quotes here, flips to South Carolina. And it was really interesting to watch the South Carolina fans yesterday. I'm one of these guys. I just like to watch what people are doing online, especially, message boards, social media communities, things like that. I just like to watch the SEC conversation unfold. And there was a pretty intense debate yesterday amongst South Carolina fans as to whether the Westmoreland thing actually counts as a flip, given the fact that Georgia's recruiting at such a level that you might wonder, well, does Georgia have, something bigger in its plans than Westmoreland? Now, I'm not going to say that in a way of disparaging him, because I said before that there's a lot to like about him as a player, but it was interesting to see just how much honesty now exists. I mean, the average SEC fan that follows recruiting is pretty plugged into all of this. Reading everything that's available online, absorbing everything that's available social media. There's a mainstream fan that, still exists that you can kind of pull the wool over their eyes. But the person who's really ingesting recruiting news for the most part, it's a little bit hard to fool that guy or gal. And so there were a lot of South Carolina fans like, I'm not really quite so sure this is a flip. But to the fans who say that, I will say this. Recruiting is also one of these interesting things where, even if you think you're going to move on from a guy to find somebody better, sometimes that works out. But sometimes the guys that you move on from end up being pretty good players there as well. I mean, there was a time in years past that Georgia probably moved on from Elijah Moore, wide receiver that ends up going to Ole Miss. You saw the numbers that he put up for the Rebels over the course of his career there. Remember Rashad Wildgoose, defensive back, ends up in the Big Ten. He was a guy that got drafted over the course of this past weekend there as well. So sometimes, recruiting is one of these deals where the scholarship numbers are obviously very limited. You don't have room for everybody you'd like to sign, and you make the best choices you can about who in terms you prioritize with those 25 that you have available. And some of the guys that sometimes you don't quite have room for end up being pretty good players in their own right. Maybe an example of that for Westmoreland. There is also a lot of this in the SEC right now of those programs that go after that next tier of recruit, and that guy comes in, plays the chip on the shoulder. So you may see some of that for Shane Beamer's charges there in Columbia. Speaking of the other Columbia in Missouri here for a moment, this is pretty interesting. It's been out there for a couple of days. We're just now kind of getting around to it here. But Jadarius Perkins was a junior college defensive back. He's out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi for the 2021 class. I believe that he was I think I have this right, number 2 DB behind Nugget Warren, of course, Georgia fans are very familiar with. Well, Perkins goes to Missouri, and he actually participated in Missouri spring practice, and word was a potential competitor for a starting job there, but he's gone in to the transfer portal. Now, this would be interesting enough to speak about in its own right, but Jadarius Perkins also has recently tweeted this, and this is worth us sharing here for a moment, that he's actually been offered a scholarship by the University of Georgia. Perkins saying that Georgia has offered. Georgia not the only one. He's also tweeted the same thing about Texas as a, for instance, on that. So he's getting some big-time offers after going into the transfer portal. So for whatever reason, not happy there at Missouri after showing some abilities and some skills, moves on the transfer portal, and apparently drawing a little bit of interest from Georgia right now. That is worth paying attention to. We talked about this yesterday as a strong possibility. It is now a thing that has happened. Jamison Williams, former Ohio State wide receiver, who seemingly was leaving that program because of how crowded the wide receiver room is, has sort of weirdly ended up at Alabama, another place that's also very, very loaded at the wide receiver position. And, the key takeaway in all of this is, for all the chatter about, guys looking for better opportunities, things like that, the big high-profile transfer portal receivers the last few days, they've all gone to trusted brands, right? When Xavier Worthy leaves Michigan, he goes to Steve Sarkisian at Texas because of what Sarkisian had done in Alabama, or at least you presume that was a big part of it. Mike Woods leaves Arkansas, goes to Oklahoma because of its history with wide receivers. Jamison Williams says, I'm not getting used at Ohio State enough, but I'm going to go to a place that's also really deep at receiver because look at all the Alabama wide receivers and all the success they've had. That clearly seems to be a thing that matters there when it comes to all of that, and the rich get richer in terms of Alabama on that front. One more story to get to here really quick. This is kind of an interesting guy. Jay Hardy was one of those very contested commitments. My memory of him in the class of 2020 was, at one point, he went from like a top 12 to a top 16. He really had a lot of schools that he was considering for his recruitment. Ends up signing at Auburn, and as has happened a lot for the Tigers as of late, Hardy is now going into the transfer portal. This is one of those names, just given the fact that so much of what Hardy was considering prior to going to Auburn was SEC related. You're kind of left to wonder, was there another SEC school, especially one of these schools that hint, has a lot of open scholarships right now and kind of needs all the help that it can get. You kind of wonder if other SEC schools might be looking to get in the fold here for Hardy a little bit. Obviously need a little bit of help in relationship to the SEC changing its rule that prohibits the current ban on intra-conference transfers. The NCAA rule, the free one-time pass there on transfers, that does not supersede the SEC rule. The conference rule supersedes that, and as of now, the SEC still bans immediate eligibility for intra-conference transfers, even though they had the kind of the one-time waiver a year ago. So for names like Jay Hardy, and I guess to a certain extent the guy that was at Missouri there as well, for some of these kinds of names, they are going to be looking to see, does the SEC loosen this prohibition on these intra-conference transfers? That's kind of the next big domino to fall here. And as you can tell, the entirety of the SEC through today was completely loaded up with transfer talk. My guess is rumored to be hitting the portal, exiting the portal, and going somewhere else. My guess is that's the SEC through really for the next foreseeable future, weeks and weeks, if not the rest of the summer, all the way around, as guys who aren't happy with where they are right now start looking for some new homes. For now, we'll make that your SEC through. And as we wrap up here really quick, before we do our golden shoe, let me say this. On Friday, we're going to have a very special show where I'm going to make what I think is going to be a really fun announcement. Now, we have not been able to be together in person in quite some time. But on Friday, I'm going to be telling you about the next fun, big event DawgNation is going to be doing. This is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's just kind of all falling together. For those of you who say, hey, BA, when are y'all going to be doing something again? When are we going to get together again? Get in person again? Obviously, the health direction makes it seem like we're able to do that now, and we have a big event we're going to announce on Friday. I will tell you about that, so make sure you tune in for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. By the way, speaking of a lot of fun, golden shoe here today. Today is May the 4th. That is Star Wars Day for geeky guys like me, and I want to thank Seth Rhodes for sending me a fun tweet in relationship to that with Yoda with the sunglasses on. That's a really cool thing. By the way, something else that's cool, how about Gator Hater Countdown? 179 days. Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, gets a win over those lousy, stinking Gators. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all that for you. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that. They'll keep your air conditioning tuned up to factory fresh specs. That's a really good thing. They'll just take really good care of you all the way around. So please make sure you check them out here today. Let me pull up YouTube first. We'll do some YouTube comments. Then we'll do some Facebook comments. And then we'll kind of bounce off the air here for a Tuesday. All right. HR picking stuff on the subject of I think he's talking about basketball here, where you have about 2,000 disgruntled players in the transfer portal. And yeah, listen, I'm going to be a little bit of an old head on this, and I'm not going to apologize for it, that when you open all of this up because it's what players want and you want to do right by players by doing what they want, I think you have to look at the outcome. You have to look at the results in all of this. And I hope that the media types who have pushed the acceptance of the transfer portal will also stick around to publish the results of the experiment they've undertaken. That's all I can ask for. All I can ask for is for those really aggressive voices who've wanted more and more transfer portal in college sports, let's talk about what happens to the guys who go into the transfer portal so the next generation of player can have the most information available to him about the choice that he wants to make. And listen, I'm not one of these guys that wants to put him in handcuffs forever. If you've been in a place 3 or 4 years and you haven't played yet, then obviously you ought to be free to go somewhere where you can play. But I would suggest if you're within your first couple of years of being somewhere, I think it's too early to know how it's going to shake out for you. And if you get a chance to have one good year, 2 good years at a place that was the best possible college choice for you when you first entered high school, boy, from the perspective of years here, being a little bit older, I would say you ought to probably count that as a blessing. And I'm more than happy to kind of run contrary to the current prevailing opinion on some of this kind of stuff, that we have ushered in this new experiment of, oh yeah, transfer as much as you want to, it's no big deal. Well, let's see what happens to the couple thousand names in the basketball transfer portal. How many of them have a place to go to? Let's see these guys who are third on the depth chart in terms of being on the field for playing, who think, well, I can go somewhere else and be a star. Let's just see how frequently that actually does work out. Let's publish those findings to make it a better decision for the next generation of people. And that's really all I'm asking for here. Jordan Bowman says I was wrong about Clemson 2018. He says they now have 7 first-round picks. I apologize for that. Ceylon Farrell, Christian Wilkins, Trevor Lawrence, Isaiah Simmons, A.J. Terrell. So I think you've got Lawrence. Oh, no. Wait. Are you saying Dexter Lawrence? Dexter Lawrence was 40th overall, though, wasn't it? Was he a first-round pick? Okay, then I apologize for that. That's my bad. My apologies. Yita Cookie says, are we going to hit the portal for a defensive back since Burns is in the portal? I think they were already looking transfer portal for another defensive back, and whether it be the not quite being done with the former Clemson DB. By the way, you've seen that name on a few of these mock drafts here as well. Darian Kendrick. You're seeing that Darian Kendrick name show up in a couple of these mock drafts. I don't know if that's one of those things where Georgia still goes back to him before it's all said and done, or it's the young man from Missouri who I mentioned that Georgia gave an offer to. But Georgia was probably likely to be active in the defensive back transfer portal before all of this. Bub Athy J says, so you're saying Mel Tucker shouldn't have been able to leave Colorado after 1 year as well? And I understand that question. It's obviously an inequity, at least it appears to be, that coaches move on quick. You're asking, in some cases, players to stick around a little bit longer. And I'm okay with that. I mean, if anything, I would treat coaches' contracts a little bit more like I treat the player agreement, as opposed to treating the players more like the coaches. If I was truly the czar of college football and I could do whatever, I mean, I do think a lot of programs give in to coaches on anything they want when maybe they don't actually have to do that. But overall, I'm also kind of okay with players and coaches being treated different, even though it appears to be a little bit of an inequity. Robert Barnes, and this is the point, and I think that Robert's point on this is such a good one. We've talked about this before. He says you would think that players would look at someone like Mac Jones and see that sticking around pays off. And that is the kind of thing that I just don't think that gets enough attention. That Jones had reason to believe that he was never going to be Alabama's starting quarterback. With Jalen Hurts, he came in the same class as Tua Tagovailoa. He had reason to believe he was never going to play there. You better believe. My son, I don't believe, is ever going to be good enough to be an SEC quarterback. At least if he has my athletic genes, he probably won't be. But you better believe that if I was a father to a son in a position like that, I'd be citing Mac Jones as an example, and I'd be citing, guys like Kyle Trask as an example there as well, because I do think those stories matter. Connor Raleigh.
Don't you also have to bring up, though, that Justin Fields came in, didn't get a chance to play his first year at Georgia, transferred to Ohio State, and was immediately a Heisman finalist and the quarterback for a playoff team? That
is certainly an example of it working out. I don't know that – if you want to say that the Jones situation is not representative of a larger class of people, that's fine. I'd say that the Field situation may not be representative of a larger class of – it worked out so perfectly and beautiful for him. I would say that much the same way that your business plan shouldn't include being a lottery winner. If your transfer plan means being as good as Justin Fields was for Ohio State, then you're probably setting yourself up for an unreasonable standard.
Granted, I think Joe Burrow stayed 2 years at Ohio State, but he did something similar where he left Ohio State and started right away at LSU. Mac Jones, I believe, is certainly an outlier, as you could say the same for Justin Fields there.
I guess my final point, though, on this, is, and this is why I'm glad Robert brings this up, is I think it's easy to convince a kid he's going to be as good as Justin Fields, or it's a little bit harder to convince somebody, because this is not human nature. It's human nature to be restless and impatient and say, I'm going to go somewhere else and do just what Joe Burrow did or do just what Justin Fields did. I'm going to go somewhere else and be just as good as those guys are. Whereas if you really look at the experience of a lot of people across a lot of sectors, segments of life, sometimes being patient and sticking things out and being a Kyle Trask or being a Mac Jones, that's not human nature. That's not instinctive to do it that way, which is one of the reasons why I hope some players are getting that advice, because sometimes that is the better advice.
I mean, I on the Georgia team alone, though, you can point to a guy like Robert Beal who's been patient, to your point, and waited his time, and he's probably not going to get a chance to play a whole lot this year. Latavius Brini as well. He's patient, waits his time. Looks like he's got a chance to potentially be a starting star, and Georgia goes out and brings in a guy in Tyke Smith.
Yeah, but I think the jury is still out on both Brini and Amir Speed and guys like that. I think the jury's still out on, hey, would they have been better off going somewhere else or by – because, look, if you have one good year at a place like Georgia, first of all, that's a moonshot in terms of an athletic achievement. And second of all, it gives you a chance to play maybe in the NFL, things like that. I mean – I think there's something to be said for if you can stick it out and earn your chance to play for a school like Georgia, even if it's one good year, the things you have a chance to accomplish in that year, I would say that's a pretty valuable athletic experience.
Right, but I mean, everyone is looking for something different, and I think college football is an incredibly difficult thing for guys to have to go to, and if you're going to put that kind of work and effort in, I think you certainly want to have that rewarded with playing time.
Here's my final point. The argument you're expressing is certainly the common opinion. More people agree with you than agree with me, and I am totally fine with that. But I just hope that we will keep track of who all goes in and what happens to them once they get there. That's all I'm asking. This experiment that we're undertaking in college football, in college athletics across the board, basketball included, let's just keep track of the results. Let's see how many guys it works out for.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking. A couple more comments here. Enrique Murillo saying that Latavius Brini stood out and played well in the Cincinnati game. Yeah, I really thought he did there as well. It's really amazing how many of those 2017 defensive backs have really proven themselves to be pretty good players. Brini maybe having a chance to do that. I still think Amir Speed has a chance to do some things there too. HR picking stuff on the subject of Justin Fields transferring. Brady Pest Management says Alabama gets the absolute most of their players, and their players benefit. UGA players get the most out of UGA. Not sure it's the other way around. And, yeah, I mean, this is something – I think I talked to John Stinchcomb about this yesterday in our podcast interview. I mean, if you are looking at a difference, and it's been brought up a million times, that it just doesn't really seem like Alabama has very many juniors that leave and go on to be fourth-round picks, right? You just doesn't seem like you have a lot of that. And I don't know that I'm quite smart enough to say exactly why that is. But it does seem like they have done a good job of, first of all, their batting average. Now, like guys like Dylan Moses, people like that are a little bit of a they kind of run opposite of this. But for the most part, the Alabama batting average on 5 stars turning into pretty good draft picks is pretty good. Their batting average in terms of the juniors who usually leave for a good reason. It's all part of the Alabama success formula. It really is. And I don't know that I fully understand exactly how they've done that. I mean, one of the theories I've kind of posited before is that, Alabama's kind of recruiting a sort of within the category of 5 stars. They are also recruiting kind of the 5-star of the 5-star. It's kind of the same thing for when people kind of point out, well, look at all the success that Georgia's had with 3-star recruits. I think that falsely assumes that 3-star recruits are all just kind of equal and even across the board. Whereas like the 3-star recruits that Georgia is getting are oftentimes guys who also had offers from Auburn and LSU. And so, it's a little bit different kind of 3-star. Some of Georgia's best 3-stars are 3-stars who've gotten, huge offer sheets all the way around. So I think that within the 5-star category, maybe the same thing's kind of true for Alabama. They are selectively choosing within the category of 5 stars, and that's why their NFL draft batting average for those guys may be as good as it is. But you can't deny that's a huge part of the Bama formula is they seem to have that draft thing really figured out, and it obviously plays out all the time. All right, let's bounce in here and get a few Facebook comments there as well. And hope everybody's doing great today. On Facebook here for a moment. Matt Rugavina says the transfer rule is also a way for Bama to stockpile talent by encouraging the transfer of guys who are not working out. And yeah, that's kind of the unpleasant part of this, whether, be it a place like Alabama. But, I mean, there was a story, I briefly mentioned this, I think on the other day, where it's like, sometimes you hear coaches, there was a kind of a first-person account of, and I think it was actually Mel Tucker when he was coaching at Colorado, of, if you don't want to do what we want to do here, the transfer portal's right over there. And that's, I think, the I guess the thing that you got to be really concerned about if you're a player is that as the transfer portal is kind of enhanced around the sport, all of a sudden it becomes a weapon that coaches can use of, hey, if you want to get with my program, then you got to go to that transfer portal. Get right or get left or whatever it is. These guys are going to say, and I think, as I've said before, the economy of college sports at the football and the sports that we are most likely to talk about in a show like this, the economy of all that is sometimes different than it's perceived to be. It is still easier to fill a roster spot for a team than it is to find a roster spot for a player. That's just the way that it is. I mean, see all these parents of, high school athletes, things like that. The money they're spending on personal coaching and travel teams and all the things that go along with that because they are dying for one of those roster spots. I mean, I know, especially in sports like baseball, things like that, I know plenty of parents will end up spending more trying to get a college scholarship than they'll get in the value for that college scholarship because of the prestige that kind of just comes with all of that. It is still easier to fill a roster than it is to find your way onto a roster, and coaches deep down know that. And so, they'll find their ways to use the transfer portal there too. Isaac Cruz, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Yeah, we had kind of a weird day yesterday where it's like you kind of hear that. I didn't even know there was an intercom in here, and all of a sudden it's like, everybody please take cover right now. And I mean, the truth is it was, I guess, bad weather. I don't really know how bad it ended up getting because we're kind of in the interior of this building, and so it's kind of hard to know. But it got pretty bad there for a while. But thank you for the kind words on that. I just hated we had to leave so abruptly, but we're all good here today. Calvin Sanders on the Westmoreland, flip. Yeah, and look, I mean, obviously for a school like Georgia, there's not as many scholarships available as players you'd like to have, and maybe that's what's going on with him there. I don't think anyone's going to say that Westmoreland can't play at the SEC level. The fact that South Carolina scarfed him up so quickly lets you know all you need to know about that. And, these programs are going to make their own evaluations and choose the best 25 they can. Brian Whitehead also thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. And he also asked a provocative question of how does Georgia want to work to keep these kids in the portal going to the portal going forward? And you would think, if anything, that Georgia is one of the schools that's sort of best positioned not to do this because Georgia just plays so many guys. I mean, Georgia played 30-something defensive players, a fairly decent amount a year ago, for instance, and does most of that most years. In most of the years for Georgia, they're going to have 20-something guys out of a normal signing class who are going to play during the year. I mean, the idea that when they first kind of gave you the free 4-game, red shirt, for a school like Georgia, that's just not really even all that applicable because Georgia plays almost all the guys that it signs. So you'd think that Georgia might be in a better position than some teams in terms of the number of guys that it's willing to play. In fact, there are plenty of Georgia fans who go the other direction of wanting to see Georgia play some of these guys less, not any in particular player, but all the kind of the rotation and the division of playing time hurting certain guys' stats. There are a lot of Georgia fans that sort of wish Georgia wouldn't rotate quite as much as it does. So from that standpoint, you would think that Georgia's already in a fairly good position in terms of this, but I just think it's just really hard to keep guys from wanting to look around. It's just really hard to do that. I don't know that there really is anything that Georgia can do on that right now, and I would say that other programs are going to be very much the same way. Of the deepest teams are going to have people coming to kind of poach off their roster. That's just kind of the world we live in now. How about this from Mitch Marchman? Really cool stuff. Saying, great night last night celebrating my niece Riley Marchman's college graduation and college golf career with LPGA golf superstar Jessica Corder. How about that? They're playing the Augusta National today. Boy, that's amazing, Mitch. Really cool stuff all the way around there now. And how about Jessica, one of the very impressive Corder sisters? Very, very cool stuff. Great to see that, Mitch. Congratulations. And here's the thing that Desmond Smith brings up, and this is such an important thing, y'all. He says, I just had a nephew that was encouraged by the coach to transfer from Michigan State. It's not always the player, but the program that wants them to transfer. And I won't pretend to know about some of these situations. I'm going to assume that may not be the case with Burns, but But, as the portal becomes more and more accepted, unfortunately, what Desmond just describes, it becomes easier for coaches to do. I mean, because if you really poll the parents of, I'm talking about because we think about like the highest tier of college recruit that comes to a place like Georgia. But there are, 130 schools that play Division I football, FBS level football, and there are 85 scholarship players on each and every one of those teams. So we're talking about thousands of players, prospective Division I athletes. If you really if you wanted to be pro player, like, hey, I want to create rules that actually benefit players, that players actually truly want. If you really polled the parents and the families and the players themselves who are hoping to play college football, and you said, hey, what is it that you really want from your college experience? I'm not quite so sure you wouldn't hear more often than not, can you protect my roster spot? When I go to a place, can you guarantee I'm going to stay there? Now, everybody wants to play and things like that, but there are, of the thousands of people hoping to play FBS level football, I can promise you that's a prevailing concern that doesn't get talked about as much because we fixate on the highest tier of recruit that's going to, be able to kind of move about freely. But for the prospective Division I level athletes, they want to know that the program that signs them is going to keep their promise to them and keep them on the roster and not look to move on from them and go to somewhere else, especially when a coaching change occurs or something like that. If you really wanted to do right by players and create rules that actually, align with what players and their families want, some sort of protection for your spot on the roster might be one of those things. I think that's really interesting, Desmond. I appreciate you sharing that. All right, one or two more, and we're going to get ready to go. Mickey Brady says he's a Star Wars geek, too. Yeah, I tell you, I'm not completely finished with it. We only recently started watching it. This Mandalorian is unbelievable. It's the best thing Star Wars has done in forever. And I don't know quite why it's so much better than some of the recent movies have been, but this Mandalorian is so good. I'm not quite through with season 2. We're almost done. We still get a chance to watch a ton of TV, so we have to watch like little chunks at a time. Watching this with my family, even my young daughter's gotten super into it. This is just such a great show and so much fun. Back in February, went to Disney World, went to the new Star Wars world they have down there at Hollywood Studios. That was really fun. Yeah, I'll always be a big Star Wars fan. It's just a fun thing to be able to do, putting the Star Wars Legos together with my kids and, all the stuff like that. Big Star Wars guy, and so happy May the 4th to all of you. Enrique Murillo checking out. Good to have you here. Alex Howard says, will you watch AEW Blood and Guts tomorrow? So is that a pay-per-view on TNT? Is that what that is? So my AEW watching is, I would say, about 60% of what I wish that it was. I'm trying to follow it and get into it. I like what I see. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the wrestling that I grew up with, sometimes a lot more than what WWE does. I'm kind of in a stage of my life right now, and I don't mean to sound like I'm certainly not reading books and doing stuff like that. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just not watching as much TV as I used to, as much as I'd like to. So I'm not seeing as much AEW as I'd like to, but when I have watched it, it kind of reminds me of the wrestling that I really grew up with. In fact, I've been kind of trying to follow along. I know that Turner just kind of got on some of this new NHL deal in terms of televising some of these NHL games, and as you head towards especially like playoffs and things like that, I'm kind of curious to see how that potentially impacts the AEW there on Wednesday nights on TNT, because I'm glad to have it there, and I hope it stays there because I think it's a good product, but I have not watched as much as I'd like to. But if they have a big event, that's a good thing for me to tune into. I did see the Exploding Ring the Exploding Ring death match thing that they did. I saw the aftermath of that. I'm not going to hold that against them because I know that was a little bit of a I just think everybody has a mess up every now and then. But generally speaking, I kind of like what they do. All right. Couple more, we're going to go. And I certainly like the off-topic questions. I know some people get a little nervous about those, but I don't mind going off-topic every now and then. Let's see what else. Michael Porter hoping Eddie doesn't enter the transfer portal. Yeah, me too on that. I very much hope that's not the case. But I think we're going to keep Eddie. We have a pretty good offer on him. All right, last one before we go. Gregory Nowak says, players, not unlike the rest of all people, want the best of both worlds. All the freedom that comes with free agency, but a safety net in case their multiple decisions turn out to be bad. Yeah, and listen, I'm probably the same way on some of that. That I think the average decision-making process for these players is not all that different than some of the decisions we make from time to time, and there are some risks associated with it. It's one of the things I always think is somewhat unfair to the players, and the fact that they're forced to make some of these decisions at a very young age, and in addition to the coaches who have like a 30-year career to come back from mistakes. If you make a bad career move, you can work your way back from that. Or if you choose the wrong player, you've got 25 more players to choose the next year. Whereas the players themselves, their window for all this is only about 4 or 5 years. The stakes are just higher when a player makes a decision. So that point I definitely understand. So Isaac Cruz thinks that Eddie still needs some Savage pads. I like the idea of that for sure. I think we have some new things coming for Eddie in the very near future, but I can't quite get into all that right now. Daniel Aldrich likes the idea of bobbleheads. Boy, I love the idea of that too. Randy Hall says, any update on the Auburn angling team that had kind of run afoul of the NCAA? No, I'm not quite so sure what's new with those folks these days. All right. Appreciate you being here today for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check out AJC.com for the latest from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with the aftermath of the Atlanta Falcons, the NFL Draft, Hawks getting ready for the playoffs here upcoming. Of course, Braves kind of scuffling along a little bit right now. Make sure you get all of that online, AJC.com. Also, a lot of big news as well in relationship to really just everything going on. Aftermath of the weather in Atlanta yesterday. How did that hit our city? You can find out about that. All kinds of stuff going on. I know there was some stuff related to some of the street racing in Atlanta that kind of came out yesterday. That's kind of an interesting story to follow. A lot of stuff online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution there at AJC.com. Make sure you check out all of that. Thanks for being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down here today. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. They'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So make sure you find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out YouTube.